Good afternoon, everyone. This is Allie Mastardo, Senior Association Manager of PPRA. Thank you for joining us today for the PPRA Ahead of the Curve webinar, Road Network Improvement Following Economic Downturn, INDOT. This is the fourth webinar in the Ahead of the Curve webinar series for roadresource.org. We do have you all on mute for the webinar and we'll be using the question function for any questions. Questions will be answered at the end. The recording of this webinar will be provided to all attendees via email and will be available on roadresource.org. Brief introduction before we begin. Lindsay Matoush is President and CEO, and Grace Stansberry is the Account Executive at Very Consulting, the marketing firm that has partnered with PPRA to create roadresource.org. Joining Lindsay and Grace today is Todd Shields with INDOT. We'll now turn the webinar over to Lindsay and Grace.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We are excited to be here and to continue this theme of conversation around how agencies can be equipped to respond to the current economic crisis in strategic ways that help you gain ground on your networks. We start by saying thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. We know that you guys and women out there in seats of public service carry a huge burden and are every day working to maintain what is one of our most ubiquitous and valuable assets, and often underappreciated and taken for granted. So we start by saying thank you for all the incredible work that you do to keep our communities moving. And we hope that we take it pretty serious that you're giving us an hour of your time, and we hope to add quite a bit of value to you in helping you continue to do that work with excellence. So since COVID-19 began, in Grace and I's work, we're constantly meeting with agencies, listening to agencies, and trying to understand what do you need from the associations in order to do your best work. And here's what we've heard. We've heard that COVID has impacted people in all kinds of ways. We've heard everything from budget cuts and halted projects and less revenue and frozen budgets to expedited projects, conversations around a stimulus, increasing public pressure to fix roads, and we know that this conversation is changing daily. And so that gives us really, as always, a focus on two things. With increased budget demands, how do you continue to improve your road network? And how do you put every dollar to use more effectively? We know that this is always kind of the name of the game for asset managers, pavement managers, and that has become even more focused or intensified since COVID began. So today we'll be obviously talking to Todd, who I'll introduce in just a moment, but want you to recognize the resource that we're pulling from is roadresource.org. It's a free resource for those of you who haven't spent much time there. And it's the result of a partnership between the Asphalt Emulsion Manufacturing Association, the International Slurry Surfacing Association, and the Asphalt Recycling and Reclaiming Association, who came together actually 5 years ago and did a big research project to listen to agencies all over the country and say, what is it that you most need from us? And how can we best equip you to make every dollar work as hard as it can and to do the best job you can with your networks? And the answer was really to build a one-stop shop that would have decision-making tools, technical resources, and insights. And that's what you have in roadresource.org. It's a 500-page website. So we do these webinars to help you learn how to use it, but also to feature people who are in your shoes, who can share the learnings that they've had in trying to do the best job that they can with taxpayer dollars. So what are we going to cover today? We have Todd here from INDOT, so we'll be talking about INDOT's network. We haven't talked to a DOT in a while. If you've been on the last couple webinars, you have seen that we have featured more local municipalities, city or county agencies. And so we're excited to have Todd here with the resources and the strategy of a DOT, but focused on some of the things that you can do even with smaller budgets to apply some of these learnings. We'll take a look at the 2009 Pavement Preservation Initiative that INDOT undertook And the reason that we're doing that is because of the parallels. What happened in 2008, 2009, and how that drastically impacted budgets is not dissimilar from what's happening today in the current economic crisis. And there are some really smart, proactive moves that INDOT made during this time period that set them up for much better success. So Todd's going to share with you the learnings that INDOT gained from that and give you some insight as you think about what moves do we make today in light of the current environment, and how do we use whatever comes down the pike in 2021 and beyond to set us up for the best future for our roads. We'll also spend a little time talking about how they prioritize projects. There's some really interesting things that we thought you would find valuable. And where's INDOT today? The moves they made following recession and during the recession and ensuing years. How did that impact where they're at today? So we want to give you a snapshot there, and then we'll do a little bit of lessons learned. So that's what's on the books today. We have one promise to you always, and that is this. Everything we do is about empowering agencies to be the best possible stewards of their road networks and taxpayer dollars. And as we seek to achieve that today on the webinar, or kind of one more step in that direction, I want to start with a couple polls to find out where you guys are at. So the first question that we have for you all today is, are you anticipating decreased, level, or increased budgets in 2021, or do you not know? We want to always get a sense of what you're dealing with and anticipating so that we can keep organizing resources that benefit you. So if you don't mind clicking on the screen there, just click one of those budgets and click one of those bullets and hit submit. Give you another 15 seconds or so to get your votes in. All right, go ahead and close that poll. And here we go. Looks like a little over half of you are looking at decreased budgets, 15% level, 5% increase. That's interesting. And then 24% of you don't know. So that certainly means that we are entering 2021 with quite a bit of uncertainty and increased pressure on the budgets that we do have. I'm going to ask you one more question, and that is this. In light of what you just answered, are you making changes to your pavement program or your annual planning as a result of either increased, decreased, or unknown budgets? Wow. We have some proactive managers on the call. So it looks like 73% of you are making changes to your pavement program. I wish that we were in a live session here and I could get up on a whiteboard and ask everyone to sort of share with the room what you're doing. But what I will ask you to do as I start to introduce Todd and move into the meat of the presentation is just quickly, actually in the questions portion of the webinar panel, go ahead and give us, if you will, if you said yes to that question, give us one sentence on what you are doing different in your pavement program in light of budgets. We're not going to share that out necessarily, but I would love to see those pop up in the questions section so that we can get a sense of what moves you guys are making and how we as organizers of this webinar can support you. So with that, while you guys are answering that, I'll go ahead and introduce Todd Shields. So Todd has his PE and is a 1994 graduate of Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology in Terre Haute. Since he graduated, he has worked with the Indiana DOT in various roles, including design. I believe he was the first pavement preservation engineer, and in highway maintenance. On the side, he's active in industry leadership and makes a point to sort of give back and continue learning at that national leadership level on the Midwest Pavement Preservation Partnership and also the Emulsion Task Force. So he still lives in Indiana today working with the DOT. So with that, Todd, I will turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about INDOT's network.
Very good. Thank you, Lindsay, and good afternoon or good morning to everybody, depending on where you're at. Just a real quick overview of INDOT's network, and I realize a lot of local agencies on the call, so want to try to scale this to how Indiana's local network is set up as well. So the DOT, we have about 28,000 lane miles of pavement. Overall, we've got close to 200,000. So that means we've only got, the DOT's only got about 15% of our lane miles in the state. But we are carrying 85 million vehicle miles traveled compared to about 130 overall, which means even though we're 15% of the lane miles, we're carrying about 65% of the traffic on our network. ADTs range from our highest, we've got a few 200,000 ADTs. The Borman Expressway is on the northwest tip leading into Chicago. We've got a couple stretches in the Indianapolis area that are pushing that as well. And we've got lots and lots of roads in the 100 or more ADT area. Climate-wise, we're pretty much a -22 state. As far as PG grades go, if you look at the very southwestern tip compared to the very northwestern tip along Lake Michigan, there's a pretty substantial climate change between those two regions, but in between, it's pretty much the same. Shown there, we have a lot of freight move through the state. You know, we're known as the Crossroads of America, and that is expected to substantially increase over the next 20 years. And our shameless plug, of course, we've got to talk about how we were ranked #2 for infrastructure in the 2018 CNBC Top States for Business.
Fantastic.
So a little more of a breakdown of our pavement inventory here. You can see the blue lines are centerline miles, the gray lines are lane miles. And illustration here, you know, majority of our pavements are non-interstates. But even though interstates are less than 20% of our total lane miles, they carry about 45% of our traffic. So when we talk about risk later on, we're going to hit on how we treat the interstates a little bit differently than we treat everything else. So we had to go all the way back to 2005 to make this story make sense. You know, we wanted to tell the story through our Pavement Preservation Initiative and the economic downturn of 2009. But in order to really tell that story, we had to go back to 2005, where we had no formal preservation program at all. In fact, 2005 was the year, 2004-05 was when pavement preservation as a term was just becoming popular. You had the National Center for Pavement Preservation, I think, formed around that time. Our budget was $300 million a year for pavements, probably a little bit less than that. As far as resurfacing goes, that budget was evenly split between our 6 districts, so we had no concept of asset management. We were just splitting the money 6 ways and say, have at it. And so depending on the needs, some districts were getting more money than what they needed and some were starving. So why did I say we had to go back to 2005? Well, several things happened in 2005 to kind of set the stage. One of them was we had an administration change, which came in, and one of the first things we did was we leased our toll roads. So the Indiana toll road is I-80 along the north side of the state. So we were able to lease that for $4 billion up front, and we used that money to fund a 10-year predominantly expansion program where we were adding lanes, we were building a new interstate, we were upgrading roads to freeway standards. That was also the year that Larry Galehouse with the National Center came in and did a technical appraisal for Indiana. And that was a deep dive into how we manage pavements, top to bottom, from the district level to executive level. And I think in 2006, we got the final results of that, and it had a whole, almost a roadmap laid out for us of kind of where we needed to head. We also were going through a major department-wide reorganization. We were moving boxes around, we were adding positions, we were eliminating some positions. So that kind of segues into, there you go. We were able to get this pavement preservation engineer created in late 2006, early 2007. And that was my position. I was the first one in that role. And that was one of the major recommendations that came out of the National Center's technical appraisal, was you got to have a point person on this. You've got to have someone championing the program. So what did we start out doing? Well, we had to evaluate what treatments were out there, what were going to work in our area. We had to develop specs because we didn't have specs. If we had them, they weren't good for any of these treatments. Lots of training. I think we brought in just about every NHI and National Center pavement preservation training class there was over those years. And the main bullet to take away there is ensuring proper project treatment selection, because if you put one of these real thin treatments on the wrong road, you're not going to be happy with the results. So
hey Todd, can I ask you, I think every time you move, your mic is hitting your shirt and it's causing some background noise.
Yep.
So if you don't mind kind of pulling that out a little bit so it doesn't knock around so much, that would
Sorry
be great.
about that. I'll talk less with my hands too.
Also, while I have the floor, thank you for the comments about how you all are adjusting your budgets. They're fascinating as they're coming through. And I'll also make sure to plug, if you have questions for Todd, plug them in the questions box and I'll make sure to send those his way as we go throughout the presentation, or save the ones that make sense for the end. Okay, Todd, back to you.
Alrighty. Yes, so this graph is just an overall what happened during the 2009 recession. And many of you were probably in maybe your current roles or a similar role at that time, and crude oil prices went up, which meant asphalt prices went up, which meant gasoline prices went up, which means people drive less, and so there's less fuel tax being collected. So you're collecting less revenue. At the same time, asphalt prices are going up, which means you can buy less with what you have. So not a good recipe for success. So that led us into 2009, our what we called our pavement preservation initiative. And when you get into, when times get tough as far as revenues go from a fuel tax, from a state DOT's perspective, we've always got our federal funds, but we have to match those. Typically it's 20% state to 80% federal. So state funds become very, 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 very valuable when you get into those situations, because we need all of our state funds to match and maximize the federal funds that are coming to us. And by developing our pavement preservation initiative in partnership with Federal Highway, we were able to use federal funds for this program, and we didn't have to use 100% state, because that probably would have been a non-starter for us. So what it did, it established formal rules for candidate approval, how we integrated with our pavement management system. There were reporting requirements, specific triggers and conditions so that we would ensure we use the right treatment on the right road. And we did get dedicated funding for the districts to do this. That was the only way we could see to make this work. So we had dedicated funding for our preservation program, which at the first was those treatments shown below, the chip seal microsurface and the ultra thin bonded wearing course for the asphalt pavements, and of course concrete pavement restoration. We'd also began looking, as part of that new treatment evaluation, hot in place, cold in place, and full depth reclamation. I believe we did our first FDR job in 2008. So we were really just getting into that type of work at that time. The reason concrete pavement was important here, we didn't have a lot of concrete pavements at that time, but as part of our expansion, we had changed to whenever we did a reconstruction, we would go to what was called an alternate bid. So we would let asphalt and concrete contractors bid against each other, and we applied a factor, and then depending on how that shook out, they would be awarded asphalt or concrete. In most of those cases early on, they were going concrete. So we were getting a lot of new concrete pavement being built, and we knew we had to account for that, because lots of concrete pavement was going to be out there that was going to need to be preserved.
Mm-hmm.
So this is and don't pay too much attention to the numbers on the left, but this is just showing, I mentioned how we were in expansion mode at this time. So the orange lines are our total pavement expenditures overall. The gray lines are just taking care of what we have. So not adding lanes, not new construction. So you can see we were spending a lot of money on those, adding lanes and new construction. And then the spike you see in 2011 was the effect of the stimulus. So that was kind of the wave when the stimulus jobs all came through. Okay. So this chart there's two charts here. The top one shows how we were ramping up our total miles of surface treatments. So you can see in 2009, we were doing very little. As the program ramped up, we were in that 1,500, 1,800 mile range, and that stayed pretty steady through the years. Now the bottom chart is showing our network conditions, and our KPI, our metric is percent poor. And so I need to explain why this looks the way it does. Pavement preservation treatments will never take a poor road and move it up into a good category. They are intended to be used on good roads to keep them in the good category, to keep them from falling into poor. So this is showing that as we ramped up our preservation program, we were able to keep our percent poor pavements very, very constant. We were not seeing an increase in the percent poor roads because we were able to keep roads in good condition good, and then we could address those poor roads with the money we were saving. So we can move on to
Hurdles.
hurdles. Yep. Major hurdles that we faced, there were quite a few. Trouble finding qualified contractors. We didn't have any microsurface contractors in the state. In fact, there was only one regional micro contractor that we had bidding our work. So that caused some concerns about sole source and maybe not getting competitive bidding and the best pricing we could get. There are, of course, internal disputes. There's personality conflicts, who's in charge. Developing good specifications. So again, we thought we had good specs. We found out when we started building these jobs, maybe they could be improved. So one of the ways we got around that was, we learned to partner a lot with our industry, our material suppliers, and our contractors. And the National Center was a big help as well, because that allowed us to, the peer exchanges with our neighboring states, and so we could learn from their mistakes. Identifying proper project candidates, that's critical, and that was part of our PPI. Was we had kind of a centralized project selection. So we would work with the districts, but we kind of had final say on what their candidates were, what their program was, so we wouldn't allow the wrong treatment to go on the wrong road. And we had that element of consistency since these were new to everybody. Mentioned a lot of training. So all that training we did to help identify proper candidates, what treatment works where. Designers needed, because they didn't know what these treatments were. So they needed training as well. But then when we got to construction, we found out, ooh, that's a big gap, because it's hard to train construction inspectors well in advance because there are so many of them. You may have in a district in a year 6, 7 preservation jobs, and so an inspector may be on 2 of them, he may be on none of them. So what we started doing was we would develop these quick reference guides, which is kind of an example, and we would show up at the project kickoff meetings. So we would meet with the project inspectors and show them, here's what you're going to see, here's what this treatment does, here's what a good job looks like, here's some things to be watching for. So,
Hey Todd, I'm curious, when you were so you introduced quite a bigger toolbox. If you'll go back one slide, Grace, at one time.
Couple slides back, yeah.
I'm curious, did you hire consulting engineers? How did you decide which treatments you started with? Did you work with contractors and manufacturers in industry? How did you kind of get the knowledge base that you needed to feel confident trying some of that?
So we did not have consultants involved, and our toolbox wasn't that big starting out. We had chip seals, microsurfaces, and ultra thins. So those were kind of our 3 sort of new ones. It's not like we'd never done any. We'd done an experimental job here and there. And we had done, prior to 2009, we had started doing a few. So we felt like we knew where these treatments were appropriate. And again, just that knowledge base through the National Center and through our neighboring states, I think we were confident enough going forward that we didn't need to get consultants involved.
Okay. Did you partner with contractors and manufacturers on it?
Oh yeah,
or
definitely.
Pretty much in-house?
Yeah. No, we learned that was the key, was to partner with your material suppliers and your contractors, because they know what their materials are supposed to do. They know what a good job looks like, and they know what a good spec looks like, because they're the ones having to meet it. So yeah, that's a good key.
One thing that has been interesting when we had a chance, Grace and I had a chance to work with many of the contractors, manufacturers, or agency folks who were building out the technical resources on road resource. And one thing that we heard over and over again was every quality contractor saying, we have to put the right treatment on the right road. Like, we can't afford to just put microsurfacing on roads where that's not the appropriate solution, because then the treatment won't be effective. So I do think I wanted to just key in on that, because I think that was something that has been really effective for you at INDOT, is bringing those right people around you to make sure, who genuinely care about making sure that that treatment only hits the right road.
Yeah, that's right. It doesn't take many treatments on the wrong road where you don't get the result you want, and then you're not doing that treatment anymore. So very good point.
Yeah. And it's one of our interests at Road Resource is helping kind of the industry and the agency folks work together to collaborate on how do we really move the needle on pavement preservation or recycling. And that's one of those really key places that we see the gap closing, or that collective talent being really important. I want to understand a little bit about the wins, essentially. So you talked about some of the hurdles and what it took to have an effective program. What worked? What worked for you?
Well, I think what worked for us was, again, that partnership with our contractors, the reaching out and sticking with it, because what we found, our local contractors weren't going to invest in this if they thought it was just another flash in the pan. You know, yeah, you're going to do this for a year or two and then it's over, so forget it. We'll just ride this out. We stuck with it, and we started getting some local contractors investing in equipment. We started getting some other contractors from other states coming in. So we had a good mix of contractors. Educating our internal teams was very important. So those, by education, it wasn't just training our designers, our project selection people, it was our communications folks, because there's some education up front when the public is driving through and they see the orange signs up and they say we're out there doing work on a road in good condition, and they don't understand that because the other road that they drive on is in poor condition. Why are we working on this one first? And so we were able to educate our communications folks, the people that answer the phones, so that they would be equipped when they got those calls to understand why that was. Our commissioner at that time.
Consistent. Let me just quickly mention, you're just getting a question with someone saying, did you have any issues or complaints from the public when you started preservation treatments? So I know that's coming up a little later, but maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, that you'll get the complaints as far as why are you working on a good road. There's puzzlement there. That was probably the main thing we would get. We had to get better at chip sealing, because chip seals can be kind of a dirty job if it's not done correct. And so a lot of our complaints was dealing with chip seal. So that spurred us to do a lot to get our chip seal program tightened up. So those were probably the two main things.
Okay. Was there anything else particularly that you did to get your internal team or your decision makers on board? One thing that we hear quite a bit from local agencies is the pressure that they face from others in the department, or from electeds or higher up decision makers who might not be bought into the value of this overall program. Was there anything that you did to get those groups on board?
Yeah, and as far as the elected officials go, like I was saying, our commissioner was a huge proponent, so he was able to champion that to our legislators. He championed that to our district commissioners. So when they would get the phone calls from the mayors or from the state legislatures, they would say, no, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to survive. This is our way of doing business. And so I would say you've got to start with your commissioners, your councilmen. You've got to start with them and get them on board with it. Otherwise, you're probably not setting yourself up for long-term success.
I know this sounds a little granular, but how did you do that? I think everyone on the webinar would be like, yeah, I agree with you, but how do you do it?
Again, it's just persistence. It's sticking with the program. It's getting our executive staff on board with it, and getting them sold on it to where, no, this is what we're going to do, and then they can champion that. And it sounds easy. It sort of was, just because of the situation we were in. And you know, there was so much at that time going on about pavement preservation, and this is the way to go, you know, nationally. So I hate to say it was easy. It was not easy, but it was probably easier then than it would be today.
Okay. And then lastly, interestingly, actually, we have a few agencies who are messaging during this, during the webinar, and they're talking about wanting to revamp their programs or needing to kind of look at things differently. What would you recommend for agencies, big or small, who are beginning to look at the programs differently or the system as a whole? What do you recommend for people in those shoes?
And we'll hit on this later, but I can say you want to start simple. You know, I mentioned we only started with 3 or 4 treatments. You know, don't feel like you've got to jump into everything at once. Get good at a couple things so you can have success with them. And the other thing would be make sure you're doing the right projects. Make sure you can show that by doing this, hey, I'm getting success with these treatments. I'm keeping these roads in good condition.
Yeah. Okay. And what you said, I just want to can on because it's very consistent with what we have been hearing from lots of other agencies, is this idea of starting smart and getting it right, and then educating everybody that comes along. And in fact, there's an ERA semi-annual meeting coming up that's all virtual in a couple of weeks, and we're doing a whole session on how both sides of the equation, contractors, manufacturers, and agencies, can communicate this stuff to decision makers. So we'll be keying on that later if that's something that's of interest to others on the webinar.
Yeah, and I might point out too, yesterday was the Rocky Mountain Pavement Preservation Partnership virtual meeting, and Larry Galehouse gave a really good talk on where we were at as far as the AASHTO specs. So AASHTO has been developing specs or the Emulsion Task Force has been developing specs for AASHTO for these preservation treatments. So I know as a local agency, writing specs is not what they do. So what we found during the stimulus that affected locals as well, they were trying to use our specs to do microsurface and UBWC. And our specs really weren't written for locals. They were written for the DOT, and so that they didn't necessarily work really well. So in those instances, yeah, your DOT is a resource, but make sure you're reaching out to LTAP and looking at those AASHTO specs as well.
Yeah. And local contractors often have a pretty good pulse on what it takes to succeed in that region. Okay, let's keep moving. Here's a summary. We're putting this on screen. We're not going to hit it now, but here's a summary of some of the points that Todd just hit if you guys want to access it later.
So what I'm going to get into a little bit is Todd spoke about some of the hurdles that INDOT faced while undergoing the beginning of the Pavement Preservation Initiative, exploring new treatments, and kind of navigating that entire world. What we've built at roadresource.org is a tool to equip you to do just exactly that. Now, none of these are formal recommendations. Obviously, as Lindsay and Todd just said, nothing can replace having experts there on the roads assessing what's going on and making formal recommendations. But this is a really great way to get ramped up and to understand a little bit of, what cards are on the table that we can play. So just to frame this up, roadresource.org is a completely free website for anybody who has internet, and it's designed to equip local agencies, city, county, and leans on a lot of some of the DOT specs and DOT recommendations that Todd's going through. The site is divided into different categories or sections of information. And right now we're kind of living right here at this treatment toolbox level. We're talking about different treatments, assessing what treatments are right on what road, and making some of those decisions. Later on in the presentation, we'll get into the more network-minded decision-making tools, and we'll equip you with some of the calculators there. And then, of course, we have different sections on pavement preservation, recycling, and emulsions, with the understanding that in order to be confident to apply new treatments, you have to really understand them. So Todd went through some of the hurdles. One of the biggest ones he said was truly being able to assess right treatment, right road, and right time. We've built out a couple of tools that give you a sense of possibilities to solve your road problems. The first of which is this idea of exploring by pavement criteria. As you can see, we've laid out imagery that demonstrates which treatment applies to which road condition and gives you a good visual sense of what part of the pavement each treatment addresses. So now if you're giving a presentation to your town board, city officials, electeds, this is a really great way to give them an understanding of what your treatment's doing in that moment. And the main purpose is really to help you understand what could be possible solutions for your road. So it's a pretty simple input. We've designed this to allow you to input your pavement condition. I'll select a road that I know needs some help in the C condition with a PCI of 55, between 55 and 69. And for this example, let's say that it has moderate rutting. So I just go ahead and input that primary distress. And if you're not familiar with any of these terms, there's some quick and easy buttons or cues that allow you to understand what's going on when we're talking about this. Again, this is a great tool for communication, especially if you need to explain something to a decision maker. And then I'll go ahead and enter road type. And you can notice as I'm doing this, surface type, as I'm doing this, as I was entering some of those criteria, these treatments on the left grayed out, indicating that they wouldn't be a good solution for a road in this condition. And you can see the ones that are left in dark black are possible solutions to this, this road problem. Now, of course, there are always other factors to consider, such as geometry, truck traffic, drainage, but this is a great way to kind of get an understanding. And then, of course, if I wanted to learn more, all I have to do is click the name of the treatment, learn a little bit about it, and get some high-level insight about what this treatment can save me as far as time and cost savings, environmental savings, and then I have the ability to click to learn more. So this idea of assessing what treatment is right for your road obviously can be a complex decision-making process, but this can really help you have a starting place or a jumping off point. For many people, you may not know the pavement condition or primary distress affecting your road. We've developed a tool here that allows you to explore by photos, which you can access this way, or from the main menu, explore by pavement photos. It's the same basic principle. You can scroll through a gallery of roads exhibiting different distresses, pavement criteria or pavement condition ranging from top to bottom of the curve. And you select a road that looks like yours. You could say, okay, well, my road kind of looks like this. It gives you an example of what the primary distress you're seeing in this photo is, some possible solutions, and even describes some secondary distresses that you might be seeing, and allows you to click to learn more in the Treatment Resource Center about each treatment. In the Treatment Resource Center, right here, underneath the main menu, Treatment Toolbox Treatment Resource Center, is a main menu of 18 different treatments organized by surface treatment, pre-treatment, recycling, and base treatments, which really allows, which has given a consistent menu to each of these. So if you're curious about a new treatment or learning about it, one of the hurdles that we knew we didn't want agencies to have to face was to flip through old printed manuals, some of which might seem out of date. This is an ever updating resource for you. So we'll just take a look real quick at the cold in place recycling Treatment Resource Center. Again, this idea of equipping you with the information you need to be confident in exploring a new treatment is critical for the success of these different pavement programs that Todd's going to speak about. The TRC has everything from an overview to process and variations, gives you a sense of different ways the treatment can be applied, different equipment and machines. You can get a sense of your expectation on, well, what can I expect from this treatment if I apply it on a road with average performance versus optimum performance. Each of these treatments has an ideal performance given the criteria of the road it's being applied on.
And that's something that, Todd, you mentioned when you were talking about what it took to be successful, is having the right sized expectations about what each treatment can and cannot do. And what I would add to that is at what level of pavement are you applying the treatment, right? You can't have the same expectation if it's more distressed versus if it's in healthier condition.
Exactly. And so this menu can help you get a sense of everything you need to know from pre-construction through construction down to quality assurance, including troubleshooting, specification review, mixed designs, everything that you might need to know about the treatment. And another thing that we knew was critical for educating agencies and keeping you up to speed and equipping you with the information you need is to really bridge the gap between research and performance and acceptance and application. There's research constantly coming out about all of these treatments from NCAT and the test track all over the place. But what we've seen is that, again, that information isn't always accessible. So we've assembled research and performance stories about each of these treatments. And even more so, success stories, the application of these treatments in various regions. We've pulled stories from around the country and around the US and Canada that show each of these treatments being used successfully, tells the story about how it solved a problem for somebody, and it really gives a sense of that sharing that Todd was talking about. You know, we worked with other states to really understand what we were getting into. So those are some of the high-level treatment tools on this website. Like I said, we'll get into some more later on. This is definitely worth exploring if you are interested in expanding your toolbox or looking into a preservation or recycling program different than what you're doing now.
So Todd, we'll come back to you and ask you to talk a little bit about prioritizing projects. And you have had a couple of questions pop up in the chat where people are wondering, do you do that mostly through life cycle cost? Or how do you actually prioritize? So I think you're going to speak to some of those questions, but let's turn it back over to you.
I will speak to some of those, but that's a really good question. And when we started out trying to identify these treatments, we were looking at life cycle costs up front to see which treatments make sense, or at what point do they make sense. So for example, FDR is not the right treatment on every road, right? So we're actually going to show an example here that's a great one, where the expensive part of fixing pavements is patching. And the more patching you have, the more expensive the job gets. Well, as you go to things like FDR, you eliminate the need for patching. So if you can imagine your curves intersecting, it makes you reach a point where it makes more sense to do an FDR, for example. And you can do that same type of analysis for pretty much every treatment.
Thank you. So tell us a little bit more about your kind of standard project prioritization.
Yes, so this is going to get into need to differentiate. So when I mentioned early on about how we would split the money 6 ways for the district pavement program, that's what I'm going to talk about now. Is how do we split the money as we shift completely, or hopefully more, into asset management mode and not just divide the money up and do your best. And so we're still looking at about 1 to 2 years out for our surface treatments, because you can't go 5 years out on a surface treatment and expect to know how that road is going to perform. But we are 5 years out on our capital program. So we're identifying projects today that aren't going to be built until 2026. And so that creates some challenges for us. But we've developed over the years, and this is how it looks today. And this is probably going to evolve again, because this was just used for the first time for our 25 program. But we've broken down, we score all of our projects on these 5 criteria. And those are risk, roughness, cracking, truck traffic, and then cost effectiveness. And you can kind of put the little graphic in there. Hopefully, there you go. So highest points is assigned to risk, and then the lowest points is assigned to cost effectiveness. And I'll real briefly go through what all 5 of these factors mean. So we can head to the next one. So risk, what does risk mean for us? From a pavement standpoint, we look at every year that a pavement ages brings it 1 year closer to failure. And you can argue what failure means, but if you think about that, how much risk are we willing to tolerate? So we look at roads from a physical standpoint. We divide our pavement sections into what we call pavement keys, and that's just an asset management section. It's a road from point A to point B that was constructed pretty much as a unit. It will be maintained as a unit. So future resurfaces or maintenance interventions will be done on that unit. And then we've got the concept, and that's the road categories. So each pavement key is assigned a road category. And you can sort of see there from the graphic that we have 3 categories. Interstates are our A's, freeways and principal arterials would be our B's, and then everything else would be our C's. And then we subdivide those categories into 1s and 2s, where the 1s being more high volume or urban, and the 2s being more low volume or rural. So as the arrows there show, we're much less tolerant of risk on our interstates than we would be of our low volume rural roads.
And we'll fly through the next slides pretty quickly in the interest of time, but we did want to make sure that you guys would have these slides to go back and reference later, because they have lots of great information in them.
Yep. So getting to this is just an example strategy for our C2s. Those are, again, our lowest road category. Makes up about 1/3 of our lane miles, these C2s. And actually, if you look from just a centerline mile standpoint, it's closer to half of our network. And this is just showing how we want to get out from a risk standpoint. We're willing to tolerate 20 years on these between, major resurface, major pavement interventions. So we come in on this example, it's showing chip seal, but it could be a microsurface or UBWC, but we come in every 6 to 8 years, do a preservation treatment to get us out to that 20 years. And that's what the top line is showing. The middle line is showing if we didn't have any preservation, we would be doing those resurface or major pavement interventions at a much more frequent interval. We would just have to, because the condition would be so poor. And you can see how you just get more and more frequent between those. And then the bottom line just shows us we do nothing. So with our existing network doing this, we think we can manage our C2 roads for $70 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
And just real quick, we can run through roughness. Many people are probably familiar with this International Roughness Index. We get automated pavement data collected every year. Pathway is our vendor. IRI is one thing that we use. Just kind of as a scale. 70 is a decent resurface, could be a little bit lower, and then we consider 170 or higher getting into that poor category. Cracking index, again, we're getting lower and lower on the scoring scale here, but cracking index is a lot harder to quantify, but we have a method to do that, and our cracking index says less than 10% is considered good, more than 40% will be considered poor. So we can roll on. From a state highway network, it's the trucks that do the damage to us. So on our scoring system, we don't look at just ADT because we're dealing with the higher volume roads. We look at trucks. Actually, a semi truck causes the equivalent damage on average of about 2,000 cars. So that's why we look at truck traffic and not overall ADT. And then our cost effectiveness score is simply the cost of the project being scored compared to some, I guess you could call it an average cost or an established standard fixed cost. That's kind of still a work in progress, but that's just to make sure that we're kind of staying in scope. We're doing what needs to be done to the road, and we're not, if an outlier were to show up, it would get deliberated, and we try to figure out why is that road so much more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So if your agency doesn't have a consistent scoring criteria like INDOT does, Todd, thanks for going through all of that. You can see the INDOT's evaluating these factors: risk, roughness, cracking, truck traffic, and cost effectiveness. And that's a consistent plan that they've outlined and they're sticking with. However, if you don't have something like that that helps you evaluate projects in a world where we have limited budgets, that's the name of the game, is identifying which projects will give us the biggest bang for our buck. Cost benefit value is a great formula for you to use and put to use. On Road Resource, we've built a cost benefit value calculator for you, and we're a little bit short on time, so I'm going to run through it pretty quickly here. Under the network optimization tab, you can learn a little bit about it, understand what this basic simple formula does. It evaluates traffic constrained by a factor to make consistent scores, traffic, life extension, unit cost, and PCI. And essentially, it's a quantification of value. It allows you to compare two projects on two different roads and understand which one's going to give you the bigger bang for your buck, and prioritize accordingly so that your budgets will go as far as possible. Here's just a quick example on the same About page of a series of road segments that are all undergoing recommended repair or treatment. And you can see right now they're organized in the second column, worst first. So the lowest condition roads are set at the top. And you can see those green bars are designed to indicate that those are the roads we'll be able to address with the current budget. However, once we calculate cost benefit value here on the far right and organize by that figure instead of PCI, we ditch one of these expensive projects here, this remove and replace, and end up being able to reallocate our budget to affect much more of the network. So I've got an example here pre-built. This calculator is just on the other side of that page here under the About and Calculator side. This is an example of a 500 lane mile network with a total budget here. And we're using a AADT constraint of 7. That's a figure that you can play with and learn a little bit more about here. You can see I've built out some of these road segments of possible treatments I want to do to my network, and I'm just going to demonstrate here the final one. This calculator is pretty simple to use. I'm going to name this road number 8. It's going to start at point A and end at point B. This road number 8 has got a PCI of 47. I'm just going to enter all these factors to help me calculate this CVV, the ADT. I'm going to say it's about 15 feet across with 2 lanes. I'm going to enter some details about road number 8, and then I'm going to include how long it is, how long the project is, and what I intend to do to that road. This is going to be a full depth reclamation with 4 inches of hot mix on top. So right now these roads are just organized by alphabetical or numerical order. But here at this calculator, I can choose to organize them by worst first, which would again align them by PCI in ascending order, or CVV. This budget line here is designed to say, if you wanted to for sure include all of these treatments above, this is how far you could get, and you may be able to fit 1 or 2 of these asterisks within your budget. Note here that currently it says we're addressing 18% of our network. So if we're doing a worst first approach, that means we're going to address this full depth remove and replace first, this PCI of 43, and spend a huge significant portion of our budget very quickly, and would only allow us to address 2% of our roads. We might be able to fit in 1 or 2 more of these projects. However, if we organize it according to CVV, which is this figure over here on the right, organize it according to CVV, you see how much more of our budget we can accommodate and how much more of our network we can address. This is a key factor in not just making decisions at the treatment level, 1 project at a time, but understanding how your planning and your projects affect your network at large.
So Todd, we'll turn back to you. I think this is a really fitting example where, and I'd love you to just quickly cover this example for people to think about this particular tool in their toolbox. Oh, Todd, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thought I was unmuted. Anyway, yeah, an example of a cold in place recycled job, and it kind of ties back into the last question that we had a road, would be a C2 category road that really poor condition. It was originally in the program for a single lift HMA overlay, and when they got out to looking at it, it was going to require so much patching, so much widening that wasn't the answer. So we can move on to the next slide. I can show you some of the distresses this road was exhibiting. This is just from a surface standpoint. So 31% of the road was in poor condition, with the average being, 153, which is getting close to poor. It was 20 foot of pavement, which for a state highway is very narrow. This road's in an Amish country, so there's lots of Amish buggies, and it's very unsafe to try to pass Amish buggies on 20 foot of roadway because they can't get off because there was no shoulder. So we can move on. This is just some more specific examples of what we were seeing. Now remember, this was in for a single lift overlay, which would be 1.5 inches to 2 inches. And you can see every layer of asphalt is delaminated in these cores. And the one on the far right, the 4th core at the top, you can see where that's actually exhibiting stripping, where the asphalt and the aggregate are just coming apart. The other thing we saw on some of these cores, and that's the bottom one in the red box, if you can see, you've got a crack from the bottom of the core coming up. That's called bottom up cracking, and that's an indicator of structural distress, which means this road had just had it. You know, there was no preserving it. So we were looking for, we can move on, Grace, thank you. So we were looking for something, by the book, this would be a reconstruction, but do we really want to reconstruct a road like that if there's a better way? So we got to looking at cold in place. So we developed a spec for cold in place, but we wanted to have a good opportunity to use it, and this was one. So we can look at, oh, sorry, that's next slides. So yeah, this is where we looked at doing a cold in place recycle, and then Grace, you can go through your calculation.
Thanks, yeah. For the sake of time, I will show you an example of this. So when Todd's evaluating which treatment should we apply on this road, should we do a reconstruction or should we do a cold in place, we've developed a calculator that's just been updated here under the recycling side, the structural comparison calculator. This is exactly what Todd's talking about. How do we address this this road for most strength and most cost effectiveness? I've already pre-filled out this calculator. What you're looking at are the different applications in the cross section. So over here on the right, you've got the conventional approach where we are going to stabilize 8 inches. Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to soil stabilize. We'll have a granular base of 6 inches and then 7 inches of hot mix asphalt on top. And you can see the strength and cost associated with that. Here on the right side is actually what INDOT decided to do, which was to cold plane 1 inch off the top, to do FDR, 10 inches of FDR with cement, 6 inches of cold central plant recycling, and 2 inches of hot mix asphalt on top of that. You can see the costs associated along with the strength. And then you can see here the overall structural number of that cold central plant and FDR job is much stronger than the conventional in this case, and much more cost effective. They ended up saving about $1.9 million. So with that, Todd, I'll have you just quickly go over the cross section here.
Yep, it's exactly what you showed in the calculator. So we had a lot going on this job. It was 10 inches of cement FDR with 6 inches of the cold and central plant recycling, and then we capped it off with 2 inches of hot mix. And with the FDR, you can pretty much work that cross section into anything you want within reason. So we were able to get that 26 feet, you know, add 3 feet on either side very easily with the FDR. We actually had a team of contractors involved here. We had one contractor do the FDR. We had another supplier do the cold in place. And then of course we had the general contractor doing all the paving work.
So what we find, and it's very consistent with some of the comments you all are sharing about how you're approaching your networks in light of decreased funding, is that recycling and preservation go hand in hand, because some of this work that Todd has done to impart strength at the same time that he's saving money and actually just utilizing the money already invested in those existing resources can then be applied to the top of the curve. To essentially just spread the money differently so that on the other side of the economic crisis, our roads aren't in worse condition than they are today. So I think this is such a great example, Todd, of that kind of hand-in-hand approach to managing the networks in front of us. What I want to do now is just ask you, where's INDOT at today? So share with us a little bit of what's happening today, and then that'll take us right until 1 o'clock Central. What we'll do there is spend 5 to 7 minutes for those who can stay on the line, and I'll field some of the questions, Todd, that people have been submitting.
So we can just real quick go through. This is our toolbox today. We've expanded quite a bit. We feel like we're good at certain things, and maybe certain things didn't work out for us, and so we've moved on. We can move down into the next slide then, where we kind of left off in 2017 previously. And the reason for that was because we had a major transportation funding bill passed in 2017 here in Indiana, which gave us a substantial increase in our transportation funding. And you can see there from the graphic that what this is showing is the orange lines are what we're getting with our new transportation funding versus the blue lines is what we would project we would have gotten otherwise. So substantial increase in funding. Now, we'll see where this heads today, but go to the next slide. Yep. So we used our pavement modeling system, our pavement management system, to try to project, okay, what would that funding level be? So we could justify that to our legislatures. If you give us X amount of dollars, we will give you this. And that's where that accountability comes in. So by giving us this legislation, giving us the money, they said, here's the money, but here's what you're going to do, INDOT. You're going to develop 20-year road and bridge plans. You're going to meet the goals that we set for you, which is 5% poor at the end of this 20-year period. So remember, we were at 10 or so % poor. So that's a pretty substantial reduction in our poor miles. But we're projecting with our modeling that we can get there with that increased funding. And so the last thing I wanted to illustrate, we talked about how we were in major expansion mode. That's not what we're doing today. We have shifted almost entirely into, okay, we've expanded the last 10 or 15 years. With very few exceptions, we're going to start taking care of what we have now. We built all these new lanes. Let's take care of them, and that's what the blue box is highlighting here. Is we're almost, our entire budget is what we call pavement maintenance, which is taking care of what we have.
Okay, last kind of question for you, Todd. We're in the middle of COVID-19. We saw in the beginning many agencies uncertain about funding next year. And we're looking at decreased funding. What would you tell local agencies or other DOTs who are on the line that they should be doing today?
So take care of what you have would be the first thing. Don't try to chase the worst first, because you're just going to drain your money. So if you take care of what you have, you're going to set yourself up for success in the future. Go slow. So like I mentioned earlier, get good at a few treatments, get familiar with them, know where they work. Don't try to do everything at once, because you're probably going to end up with a lot of things that don't go the way you want it. So get good at it. We are not, at this point, we're not projecting much revenue shortfall because of COVID, but there's just a lot of uncertainty. We're seeing traffic levels. They were definitely down March, April, June. They've kind of come back to almost pre-pandemic levels, which means our fuel tax is roughly where it was.
Okay. Todd, I'm going to keep you on the line for about 5 to 7 more minutes of answering questions. But thank you so much for taking the time to put this together and share with everyone what you learned. First question for you, do you have the data to show that pavement life increase when you use your treatments? Not the life of the treatments, but the extension that the treatments have on overall pavement life.
Yeah, anecdotally, yes, we can show that. That's how on the C2 example where we showed we were going to go out to 20 years. We've got roads out there in that category well beyond 20 years, just because we've chip sealed them so many times that you can get a lot out of that if you're doing a good candidate. Now that State Road 101 example, that was well beyond any preservation treatment.
Yeah, well, and Grace, maybe go to Road Resource and have that up in the background, if you will. Another place you can find that information, or you can find a good starting point, is on the Treatment Resource Center under expectations for each treatment. We show kind of a good, better, best, or when you apply to optimum versus stopgap. This gives you a sense of life extension. And we took some national averages here and picked kind of the average in all of the calculators, and wanted to show you what different agencies are experiencing around the country. So this is a good place to start. While we're here, Grace, will you go to the sustainability calculator? We had another question about, do we have a Canadian version? And the answer is that all of the calculators on the site, you can flip to metric units or Canadian dollars. And that will allow you to see it in your own kind of units. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention while we're here is, if you really going to make use of the site, up in the top right corner, you can log in and create an account. When you do that, it will allow you to populate all of the calculators on the site with the actual cost of the treatment in your area, the actual life extension that you experience. And when you save that, as long as you're logged in, no one sees the data but you, it will repopulate every calculator on the site to make it more usable. Another question, Todd, for you. You mentioned that you established triggers and thresholds for pavement maintenance. On a high level, how did you establish those triggers? For example, is it X inch in rut depth or
Yeah.
or Y-inch in run depth. So if you could maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, great question. So yes, we had triggers for roughness, we had triggers for rutting, we had triggers for age, and triggers for friction. So great example. If all I've got going on is rutting, then a microsurface would be a great, that's probably the most cost-effective treatment, because a chip seal doesn't do anything for rutting. In fact, if you chip seal a rutted road, you're probably going to end up with problems. Likewise, if you've got a roughness problem, we would do either an ultra thin or our thin HMA, where we profile mill, because that would reestablish smoothness.
Okay.
Is that high level enough?
I'm sure we could probably do a whole webinar on just that, Todd. You have a compliment here. Those reference guides are awesome. So I want to make sure you know that. And another question, did you test the mix designs in-house, or did you take samples to a certified lab?
Good question. So what we ended up doing for microsurface and ultra thin was go to a warranty spec, because we didn't have a lot of good methods to sample that on the road. Like you do hot mix, you can do plate samples, you can do cores. There's really no way to do that with microsurface or UBWC. So we ended up, I don't want to say punting, but we went to a warranty spec. So by going to a warranty spec, we're kind of putting that on the contractor. You give us a good job that's going to last so many years. We'll if we get 3 years out of it, we'll assume it's going to go the design life.
Okay.
Now we do require mixed designs, so they have to provide us their mixed designs up front, and we have to approve those before they can start work. But there is no sampling after that.
That was another one of your questions. Grace, will you please take them to the resources page? One of the questions that we're getting is, can you view the slides and the presentation later? And the answer is yes. We have also featured, I think Todd is our 4th expert this year, maybe 3rd expert. So all of these webinars are recorded, and you're able to see all of that here on the resources section, along with a list of other resources or education coming down the pike.
And just real quickly, if you were interested in that State Road 101 project that we ran through quickly for INDOT, this webinar right here delves exactly into that project and breaks down any questions you might have. It's a great place to start.
Thank you. While you're talking about contractors, Todd, did you have trouble finding multiple contractors to bid your original projects?
Yeah, like I mentioned early on, we only had the one microsurface contractor bidding it. They're a good contractor, but again, when you only have one bidder, that just invites criticism of sole source, and we're not getting the best price. So that was the point I was trying to make, is if you stick with your program and show that, no, this isn't a 1 year and we're done, you'll see investment come in. Other contractors will come in, our local contractors, they'll figure out how to do that work. So we saw that.
I hear that quite a bit. It's really a chicken and egg conversation.
Yeah, it is.
Right? Because contractors, it's hard to commit to investing in that equipment in that territory unless you know that the agency's in it for the long haul. But if you do, that's really how that partnership gets formed, with agency and industry moving the needle on this stuff together. Do you consider mill and overlays as preservation?
So we do. Now we do consider that single mill lift. Now those weren't included in my surface treatment graphics. That would only be the microsurfaces, the chip seals, the UBWCs. But yeah, we do consider now, that's kind of our top level preservation, would be that 1.5 inch mill and fill. Okay.
How does INDOT manage the rise in profile, which is an issue with CIR and providing structural adequacy?
Yeah, so in most of these cases, we're able to, expand the cross section. So if we can't do that, then either if a lot of these roads, I mean, this is Indiana, right? They're straight and they're flat. We can build up the shoulders. We can account for it. I mean, if we can't, you're hauling material off.
Okay. There was a question for clarity around your comment about truck traffic. People are asking, does that mean that you don't do preservation? Is that unsuitable under heavy truck traffic?
No, not at all. Not at all. That just means when we look from a scoring standpoint, we're looking at truck traffic and not total traffic, for the reason that that's what's doing the damage to us. But from a preservation standpoint, we're looking for the right candidates. Those don't really fall into that scoring system. That would be more the capital program.
Okay. One more question for you. Does INDOT consider remaining service life to select the preservation treatment?
So we did not, but now with the, I don't know if we can go back to that slide with C2, Grace. I can kind of show that. That was number 25, 1 minus 25. Next one down. Yep, there you go. So we are looking, and we have something like this built for every one of our road categories. So C1, B1, B2, and we are looking at what that magic, what we want to get theoretically, and typically it's a range, but we are now looking at, and I didn't put the nitty gritty of our scoring criteria in here, but it's not directly remaining service life, but it is looking at where is the pavement age in relation to that target age, which is an inverse, I guess, of remaining service life. So yes.
And there is,
go ahead, Lynn.
Grace.
I was just going to say there is a remaining service life calculator on roadresource.org. Underneath that, network optimization. Really, if it's something you're interested in taking a stab at, read the about page and then try playing with some projects and some of your roads to really understand what the give and the take is to gain ground on your network with that remaining service life equation in mind.
So the problem, I loved remaining service life when I was the pavement preservation engineer. I was all on board with getting that to be our measure, and I was told that's great for the engineers. But when you're trying to communicate a remaining service life of 0 to your director level or your executive level, and year to year you keep saying 0, 0, 0, they don't understand that. So just be careful.
Todd, you're getting lots of comments of people saying good job. So thank you. Really appreciate the time it took to assemble this webinar and the content today. Thanks to those of you who stayed on a few minutes longer. We still have 140 people with us to pay attention to what you have to share, Todd. For the comments, other questions that we didn't get to, we'll make sure to funnel those to Todd and send you guys back some answers. And as always, the purpose of Road Resource is here to serve you and your needs. There's a Facebook page and a LinkedIn page where we're sharing, a Twitter page where we're kind of sharing out little bite-sized pieces of the site. There's a roadmap where you can get in and kind of learn your way through it. And if you have ideas or questions for webinars that you want us to feature that would be useful to you, please let us know, because that is what we are here for. So thanks to all of you for joining, and Todd, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and experience. We really appreciate it. Have a great day.